Good afternoon to everyone who's joined us already. We're just going to give 1 or 2 more minutes to let people log on. I'm still seeing people trickle into the webinar, and then we'll get started with today's presentation. Wonderful. Well, I think we've got most of everyone logged on today. I'm still seeing maybe 1 or 2 more people trickle in, but we'll get started in just maybe 1 more minute here. Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another Roth IAMS webinar. We're excited to host this one. It's been one of the key conversations we've been having at the conferences we've been attending this year. This conversation has come up a lot, and so we thought a webinar might be a great way to sort of address it to the Roth IAMS audience. So my name is Alicia McLean. I'm our National Sales Director here at Roth IAMS. Our presentation today is on finding the Holy Grail, the integration of capital and maintenance planning. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we jump into the presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to pop it into the chat. We may not answer it right away, but we will certainly have some time for Q&A at the end, and we'll address those at that time. There is a feedback survey at the end of this presentation. I ask that you stick around and just take the 1 to 2 minutes it takes to fill it out. It just sort of helps us to make sure that we're providing you with value add content and that we continue to improve upon our webinars. And then, as always, we always provide a recording of the webinar to all of the registered attendees. So you will see that in your email inbox after the fact. Don't worry about asking for a copy of the slide deck. You will receive one, and it's always posted to our website as well after the fact if you're looking for it. And with that, I will hand it off to our presenter today, Bill Roth.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alicia, and thank you guys all for joining us today. As Alicia mentioned, we've just sort of come through fall conference season, and the discussion that I had most often with folks at a variety of conferences across North America was really about, okay, we have a handle on our capital planning and our facility condition assessment data. We're starting to sort of get an idea around our maintenance planning and our equipment inventory. But how do we bring those two things together? And that's really something we've been talking about this topic for a long time with customers, but it was really kind of few and far between. And so now we're really seeing that the industry is kind of catching up with the idea. And so we're going to just kind of walk through a little bit on how to do it, a little bit on kind of what you need to have in place, then how to actually do it and plot your course through a lot of the twists and turns to get there. We'll wrap up with one final thought, and then we do have time for Q&A. As Alicia mentioned, please do enter those questions into the chat, and we'll do our best to get to all of them at the end of the presentation. So just real quick, I'm Bill Roth, President and CEO of Roth IAMS, co-founder of SLAM Technologies. I think my head is actually bigger on the TV than it is in real life here, but I've been working for the last 30 years for public sector institutions and higher ed institutions across North America on all aspects of facility infrastructure asset management, and involved in many different industry associations, APA, NASFA, NSPMA, many others. This is where a lot of the idea for this presentation came from, through that feedback that we've had at the different conferences. And so what we're talking about, pretty much everything that we talk about on these webinars and in presentations and things like that, is focused on what we call integrated asset management, which is what the IAM of Roth IAMS stands for. And so if you've seen me talk before, you've probably heard my explanation, but I always like to start with, what do we mean by integrated asset management? And really what that is it starts with achieving excellence in capital planning for your portfolio. So this is about facility condition assessment information, prioritize multi-year capital planning, keeping that data up to date so that your data set stays live and current as you go and do those as you complete those capital projects that are based on both your programmatic and your condition needs. Why do we say start with capital planning? Well, the reason is risk management, is because when major elements and important and critical elements in buildings fail, your building shut down. You can't deliver the programs that you're supposed to be delivering through those facilities. And so as a result, we say from a risk management perspective, focus first on achieving excellence in capital planning. The next area of excellence that we recommend people kind of evolve to is operational excellence. This is really where we're talking about moving from reactive to preventative to potentially predictive maintenance, making sure that you have a good, strong handle on your operations costs and figuring out ways to optimize that critical area of your asset management plan. The third leg of the stool, if you will, is what we call performance excellence. This is where you're looking to optimize the indoor environment that you're providing to the folks within your buildings. You're looking to save energy, reduce carbon, and make sure that all the systems in those buildings are operating at peak performance to create the best environment at the lowest possible energy consumption and or carbon production. And so integrated asset management is really that sweet spot in the middle where you have achieved excellence in all three areas. So for today's presentation, when we talk about the integration of capital and maintenance, really we're talking about this overlap between the capital planning excellence and the operational excellence. There's a little bit of performance in here as well, but the majority of it is really that capital planning and operational overlap. So let's jump into what does it take? How do you why is it important? Why should you care about integrating capital and maintenance? So we're going to just turn it back over to you guys for a quick poll question. So it should just pop up here in just a second. So yes, how integrated do you feel your capital planning and O&M planning processes are currently? Fully integrated, somewhat integrated, a little bit integrated, and not at all integrated. So please feel free to pick your selection. We'll just give a few seconds for folks to submit their response. Okay. Still have a few responses coming in. Right. So it looks like we're squarely in the middle. We've got about almost 2/3 of folks either somewhat integrated or a little bit integrated, and then another third another third at the two ends of fully integrated or not at all integrated. So thanks. That's really helpful, folks, for how we kind of lay things out going forward. We've got a couple more polls coming up for you guys in just a few minutes. So to sort of set the table for this idea, I want you to kind of imagine, if you would, two different scenarios. So if you're involved in the capital planning or the capital renewal aspect of your portfolio, imagine if you were out assessing a rooftop unit and you were able to see the relevant failure history and preventative maintenance details for a unit while you were trying to assess that unit to determine how much of a useful life it had. Whether you're doing the assessment yourself or you're working with a third party like us to do those assessments. Imagine if that data was right there at your fingertips. It would allow you or your consultants to make a more informed decision about how much longer that piece of equipment has to last. You may have a relatively new piece of equipment, but if it is failing every 6 to 9 months, if we're not able to get at that information, how are we going to be able to integrate that into our condition assessment? Well, right now we would rely on an individual or a person to say, hey, yeah, I fix that thing every 3 months. Well, if we don't get that information, and it becomes anecdotal. Imagine if that information was right there as you were looking at that piece of equipment. When we're talking about the maintenance side of things, because really this is about capital informing maintenance and maintenance informing capital. So imagine you pulled up a work order to do a PM on a piece of equipment. You're going to send somebody out to actually do that work. Imagine if you could see, hey, look, the capital team is planning to replace that piece of equipment within the next year. Assuming you're like almost everybody that I know that has limited resources to do preventative maintenance tasks, why would you do PMs on a piece of equipment that's scheduled for replacement in the near future? You could shift those resources and do more PMs or do PMs on a piece of equipment that's going to be around a lot longer. So just a couple of different scenarios to kind of set the table for what it would look like. And so we really think that from an asset management perspective, because so much of it is capital renewal and operations and maintenance, when you look at the total cost of ownership or life cycle costing of a facility, so much of it is tied up in O&M and in capital renewal compared to the initial construction cost and the demolition and removal cost. We really think that organizations that can find an integrated approach to O&M and capital planning, it's one of the biggest opportunities that organizations are not taking advantage of. There can be significant cost savings just in terms of making better decisions around when to replace things, not replacing things just based on age, taking into account those maintenance activities to extend the life of those pieces of equipment. Again, smarter decisions as it relates to the allocation of resources. Most everybody that I talk to does not have enough capacity in the system to do all the preventative maintenance they want to do. Why would you waste time, again, doing preventative maintenance on pieces of equipment that are not going to be around your facilities for much longer when you've got other pieces of equipment that, even though they may be a little older, they're maintained well and the remaining useful life is longer? Put your resources there to try to extend, extending the life from 6 months to 7 months doesn't make a whole lot of difference in things. But if you extend the life from 3 years to 5 years or 7 years, that's a big deal in terms of, deferring costs, not in the deferred capital renewal and maintenance perspective, but actually extending the life of those pieces of equipment. The less failure you have, the less opportunities for things to break down, the more data that you've got, the more on top of things you are, the less disruption you're likely to have to your program, your users, and your stakeholders, which is always a good thing, because certainly if you're in and around a space over and over and over again, if things continue to fail, we just had the air conditioning in our office here fail. Everybody got sent home for a couple of days because it was extremely warm here in the Toronto area. We certainly would have been much happier as tenants if they had gotten ahead of that failure and we hadn't lost 2 days in the office. And obviously, the better maintained equipment is, the better it's likely to be operating. That you can definitely get a reduction in energy and or greenhouse gas emissions, which ties in a little bit to that performance piece that we talked about earlier. So, in our experience, why do we see organizations not doing this? What's getting in the way? What is the roadblock? Well, there's a few things, and honestly, I haven't come across an organization that is doing this exceptionally well as of yet. I'm sure there's some out there, but most organizations are struggling with this. They may have some have good capital programs, some have good maintenance programs. Not a lot of them are integrated. And why is that? Well, one of the biggest culprits is siloed organizations. Obviously, oftentimes the teams that are responsible for capital and maintenance planning are two different departments, sometimes competing for resources, sometimes competing for the same, their own piece of the same pie within an organization. And so they're not incented to cooperate or collaborate because they may have competing incentives. So even if their organizations aren't siloed, there may be competing incentives, meaning, well, if we save money on the capital, if we do something that's more expensive on the capital side, we're not actually able to get at any of the operational savings that come about. So we're not able to do more deferred capital renewal and maintenance. So why would we bother spending more of our budget if we're not able to get more budget in the future to do more things? Data is always an issue. Having quality data in order to do that integration, not only procuring or getting the data, whether you do that in-house or through a third party, but also almost as importantly or more importantly is maintaining it. It's really easy to go and get a consistent and defensible data set. That's a project, whether you're doing it yourselves or again, a third party. Getting it is one thing. Okay, we're done. Thank goodness. Let's get back to our day jobs. Soon as you go and do one project, replace one piece of equipment or do a capital renewal, your data set's out of date unless you keep it up to date. And a lot of organizations struggle with that data management piece. Momentum is another great killer of collaboration, right? This is the way we've always done it. Oh, it's hard. It would be different. It would be difficult, I should say. It would be different than what we're doing. That can just slow any change. Depends on how change resistant or change focused your organization is. Turnover within organizations. I've seen in several instances where organizations have started to go down this path. They have a champion or champions in different departments that want to drive it, but then that person leaves, and that was John or that was Susie's project, and let's just go back to doing things the way we were before. So a little bit of momentum there, but I'm tied more to the key players. And then the software. If you've got a closed software system and you're using different software products and they don't talk to each other, it becomes a lot more difficult to do this type of data integration because you have two different data sets, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. So first principles here to take this back. There's a lot of methodology we're going to talk through or things that you can do, but ultimately this is impossible to do if you're not tracking work orders against individual pieces of equipment, right? You need to be able to have the maintenance history on an individual piece of equipment within your CMMS or your work order, your IWMS system, in order to start to look at that integration. That is foundational. That is the buck stops here. So we're going to do a couple of polls here back to back, just real quick around that issue. So first question, simple, plain and simple. Are you currently tracking work orders to individual pieces of equipment? Yes or no? Give everybody a minute or two here to, or a few seconds anyways, to respond. Wow. This is great. This is surprising. I'm quite pleased to see that right now we're at 60% to 40%. Yes, we are tracking work orders to individual pieces of equipment. That is great, and I would say that probably not representative of what I typically see in the market. So we've got a very proactive crew here on the webinar. So and I guess yes, there was one comment about we need an option for some. So that is true. We did make this a little binary. But thanks for that. Thanks for that comment. So let's jump to our second poll question. There we go. Have you inventoried and tagged any equipment within your facility? So here we do have a sum option, folks. So hopefully that will work. So yes, we've done everything that we think we need to do. Yes, we've done some, but not all we want to do. And no, we haven't started yet. So we'll give everybody a few moments here to respond, and then we'll kind of dive in a little bit deeper. So awesome. So a really strong showing in the yes, we've done some, but not all, which is great to see. We've got a few folks that have responded, yeah, everything we think we need to do, and then a couple of folks that haven't started yet. So a very good proactive group here, which is awesome. And I think by hopefully by coming to this webinar, you're trying to look at how you can improve and enhance that program. So what we see a lot, and obviously not from this group, and like I said, that is awesome, but we still see a lot of organizations that are tracking work orders not at the equipment level. Sometimes it's at the building level, right? HVAC in this building, that would actually be kind of an equipment type. Or sometimes we just see, oh yeah, here's a work order in that building. Or we're only tracking reactive work orders. We actually aren't tracking our preventative maintenance work orders, which is, it's better than nothing, but those preventative maintenance work orders are really, really important to look at the extension of the life of a piece of equipment, right? If you're consistently doing the recommended preventative maintenance tasks on a piece of equipment, from a life cycle perspective, you should be seeing a longer life cycle for those pieces of equipment. So it's not just about the reactive work orders; it's about the preventative as well. And one of the most frustrating things that we see is organizations that don't complete work orders, right? So you have all of this stuff and nobody knows if it's been done or anything else. So it doesn't matter how it's being tracked, building level, type of equipment, or back to individual pieces of equipment. If the work orders aren't closed, that's almost impossible to use that data to support that condition assessment planning and that integration. And I'm sure there's other ways that organizations are tracking things that aren't at the equipment level. And so why does this matter? Well, if we're trying to integrate capital and maintenance planning, if we don't have things tracked at that individual equipment level, then we're really left to find that proverbial needle lying in the haystack, which at that point, it no longer becomes worth it. So I've been involved in facility condition assessments and equipment inventory and planning and asset management for decades now. And I can remember 25 years ago, as part of a background information request, we would get a list of work orders from somebody's work order system, right? It would be a spreadsheet, tens of thousands of lines long. To try to find the needle in a haystack would have taken more time and effort than it was going to take to do the condition assessment. So we just simply, nobody was willing to pay double the money for a condition assessment to pay somebody to scroll through all the details in the work order system to try to figure out if there's a valuable piece of information in there. So the whole idea, once we've started to track information at the individual piece of equipment level, we now are unlocking so much more power from an efficiency perspective. But there's a couple of other things that we need to do. So obviously you need to get a detailed inventory of your piece of equipment, of the types of equipment on which you wish to do preventative maintenance, or there's a bunch of reactive maintenance tasks associated with. If you've heard us talk before at Roth IAMS, we are huge proponents of not just inventory, but actually tagging, because the tag makes the identification easy. This is a fairly simple tag, but if you have a barcode or a QR code on a tag, it makes identification and the leveraging of that information. If you've got the right work order system or IWMS system in place, you can scan the tag. It can take you right to that work order. It can streamline the work order reconciliation process, which we talked about before as being a problem. But ultimately, the tag takes out all the uncertainty of which piece of equipment is which, right? If I walk in a room and I go 1, 2, 3, you could walk in the room and go 1, 2, 3 in terms of numbering. None of that you need to worry about when you got a tag on it. So now let's assume in order to get our equipment level tracking, we need to have an equipment inventory. And this, for those of you that have again been around before, this is what we call the hierarchy of existing building data needs, or the pyramid in our short form or our vernacular. And the next step, once you have the data sets, is really the challenge of integrating these two, which we'll call the foundation of the pyramid, data sets. So your equipment inventory and your condition data set. So first you have to get them, but now you also have to figure out how they link up, or how do they integrate or connect. Because the big difference is that O&M, the inventory, is at an individual equipment level, which, as I said, you need that granularity to track work orders against the individual pieces of equipment. But it's typically only on some elements within a building, right? Generally major mechanical, electrical, sometimes some minor architectural data, but it's not. So you've got a more detailed data set, right? So it's deeper, but it's on a less diverse set of elements within the building. Because capital is typically you're gathering data on all of the elements within a building, but it's element level data. And I'll show an example in just a minute of what we mean by element level. That's one level higher. If I go back to the pyramid, right, that's why this is one level up in the pyramid. It's a higher level data set. But the data overlaps, but only partially. But there are different layers of granularity. And again, within a lot of organizations, you may have an FCA or a capital planning data set and an equipment inventory, but rarely are they linked. And part of the challenge here, and again, we talked about why before, silos, different organizations, turnover, all the rest of it. But the reason is that in an equipment inventory, you can end up with and this is just a simple example, folks, but 3 individual boilers, boiler 1, boiler 2, boiler 3. In your inventory, you're going to go gather make, model, serial number, location, any other relevant data on those pieces of equipment. And you're going to have individual data points in your work order system or as part of your inventory. Now, in a condition assessment, if you're in a scenario, this is the simple scenario where you have 3 boilers that are all the same age and all the same condition. So typically you're going to have one element in a condition assessment, boilers quantity 3, let's say, for an example. So making that many to one connection is important. Now, again, that's the simple scenario. Here's the more complicated scenario where you've got 2 older boilers and 1 newer boiler, right? Because again, from an asset management and a capital planning perspective, oftentimes you don't have enough money to deal with all 3, or maybe they were all installed at the same time, but one failed prematurely or one continues to break down. So in this particular case, in your equipment inventory, you still have your 3 individual line items, but in your condition assessment, now in this scenario, you have 2 older and 1 newer, right? So you have the newer one, boiler quantity 1, new, 2 older boilers, quantity 2, old. The most complex scenario is they're all different ages, they're all different conditions, and now you've got actually a similar data set in your condition assessment or your capital plan as you do in your maintenance plan. So this is one of the big challenges, and it can get even more complicated with other elements where there may be many pieces of equipment often hidden from plain sight. So in a condition assessment for certain elements, things like pumps and fans and other things like that, you can end up with a basis of cost of the square footage of the building. So you're not actually going in and counting each and every piece of equipment. Your quantity is based on the size of the building. So you may have an element that covers everything within that facility, assuming they're all the same age and all the same condition. But you could have 30 or 40 pieces of equipment that you have to basically line up and integrate with that condition data set. So the sheer volume of equipment data can feel a little bit overwhelming. So we've talked about kind of what it is, how it works, why it's difficult, but what can you do as an organization if you've already started, if you haven't started yet, or you're already starting and you're trying to more integrate these 2 critical elements of your asset management plan. So first is it all starts with data, right? You got to have a data strategy. Just going out and gathering a bunch of data is not terribly useful in the absence of a strategy. So how will I organize it? How will I get it? Will I get it myself? Will I work with a third party? Will I work with multiple third parties? Where will I put it? Is it going to go in a spreadsheet? Is it going to go into a work order system for equipment data? Is it going to go into a capital asset management system for FCA data? And again, I always come back to who's going to maintain it and how will we keep it up to date? Because having a data set that is consistent and defensible on the day you finish the data collection is not the same thing as having a consistent and defensible data set 2 years afterwards when you've spent $5 million on capital renewal. So the other part I mentioned, right? I told that story about 20 years ago, getting the list of work orders, and there's 10,000 of them, and most of them are like not very relevant, too hot, too cold, leaky faucets, these sorts of things. Those don't matter from the perspective of the integration of capital maintenance. Those are very important to responding to the needs of your occupants and everything else. But no matter, even if we gather our equipment inventory, we link it all up. Still, if you go provide 10,000 line item spreadsheet of everything that's been done within the building, as a work order, it's still going to be way too hard to sort through all of that noise to find the signal, which are the important things. And so we want to screen our work orders and differentiate the work orders as part of through the work order creation and the work order execution methodology, so that we identify what we think is capitally relevant, for lack of a better term. I haven't come up with a better name yet, but what that means is this relevant to my capital plan, right? Is this a preventative maintenance task? Is this a reactive failure response work order? Or is this a nuisance work order or a day-to-day issue? So how do we take all the work orders we have and put them into different buckets so that we can share a reasonable amount of information between the two systems? Because the last thing you want to do is just dump all your work orders over into your capital asset management system, because again, it's going to be, we're back into that needle in a haystack situation. So that typically is going to happen within your work order management system, where you're going to differentiate, is this capitally relevant? Is this something that we want to share with our capital planning partners within the organization? That's typically done in the work order system, and now you need to figure out a way to create a link between your CMMS or your IWMS and your capital asset management system or your CAMS. And so the industry standard, as with anything, in order to have a conversation, you need to be speaking the same language. It's usually a lot easier if everyone's speaking the same language for you to communicate and collaborate. And really, that's what we're talking about here. And so the industry standard de facto language that buildings speak, for lack of a better term, is Uniformat 2. And so you need to make sure that your CMMS and your CAMS are speaking the same language. They're not just using Uniformat 2, but they're using the same Uniformat 2 structure so that you can start to link things up. If you don't have Uniformat in one and you have it in the other, or even if you have two different Uniformat structures, say you have an old 4-digit Uniformat nomenclature here in one system and you have the new 6-digit Uniformat structure here, there's manual work to map that data. So in a perfect world, you set up the two systems so they're speaking the same language, and then you can start to share data between those systems, but only relevant data. There's lots of data in a capital planning software that you don't care about in a work order system, and there's a lot of data in a work order system that are irrelevant to capital planning. That's back to that categorization and that figuring out what is relevant and what is important. It's not always just about work order systems and capital planning systems. There are other financial systems that you may need to integrate: financial ERP, space planning, other software that has relevant data. If it's all in one or the other, it's easy. You're only integrating a couple of systems, but you may have multiple systems that you need to integrate. Once everybody's speaking the same language and you know what data you want to share, then the next step is to develop a parent-child relationship between the systems. And what this is that means that if your work order system is the parent for the equipment inventory, which it typically is, you can't change that information in your work order system. You change it in your capital planning system. You change it in your work order system, and that change is fed to the other place. Because what you don't want to have is the same data in two or more places where it has to get changed, because it's hard enough to remember to go back and change it in your work order system when you change out a pump. But if you then have to go in your capital planning system and manually change that as well, it's way less likely to get done. So you figure out which data in which software are parent, meaning that's where the data resides. That's the single source of truth. That's where the data is edited. And which is child, meaning that data is transferred when changes occur. So you need to really plot out a clear workflow for those relationships. And you also need to look at how frequent is data passed back and forth. One of the questions that I get a lot is, do I need to build a live API between my work order system and my capital planning system? And normally our answer is no. And the reason is that work orders are super transactional. You could have 100 work orders in a day for some campuses or some large multi-site portfolios. You could have more. But capital tends to be a lot slower. You might have 50 capital projects in a year. And so typically where we're talking about the integration of capital and maintenance information, we're typically talking quarterly or semi-annually that we're doing this this data transfer. You don't necessarily need a live API for that level of workflow. However, depending on the workflow you build up, you may or may not decide that you need that live link. So there's a lot here. So, you know, how do we keep it simple? Where do we get started? Well, you know, what do they say? How to eat an elephant? One small piece at a time, one bite at a time, right? Nobody can swallow a whole elephant. So if you have the data sets, that's sort of the big first part. But again, a lot of you have come a long way in gathering those data sets. So if you have those data sets, you know, do a pilot, right? When we do equipment inventory, when we do FCAs, we always recommend a pilot to just kind of proof of concept, make sure it works, make sure we're not committing too much or too many resources too early until we validate all our assumptions and develop something that works. But do a pilot, test it out on a couple of one or two different elements and or equipment types, and see how it would work. As part of that methodology, you got to get your software products talking to each other. They need to speak the same language, that uniform at two piece. You need to identify what information is relevant to share, and then try it out. Did you get the right information? Did you get enough? Are you sharing enough information? Are you not sharing enough information? Do you have the granular level of detail? So without investing in the significant amount of resources that you would need to do this throughout your entire capital planning and your O&M planning methodology, start small, try it out, validate those assumptions, and see if it's going to work. So the ideal benefit. So at Roth IAMS, our vision is to solve the world's deferred capital renewal and maintenance backlog crisis. And in a perfect world, right, we truly believe that the integration of capital and maintenance will save you significant amounts of money. In a perfect world, we would use these savings to reinvest into our buildings to address more deferred capital renewal and maintenance backlog issues, right? Improve your facility condition index, take care of that DCRM backlog, as well as increase the amount of preventative maintenance you're doing. Preventative maintenance is like going to the gym. You have to spend the money early to get the results down the road. And so if you can find some savings, operational savings and capital savings by integrating the data set, how can we turn some of those savings back into doing more renewal work and doing more preventative maintenance work, which is going to then further extend the life of those critical elements within the building, therefore helping to actually decrease your deferred capital renewal and maintenance backlog, because your equipment is going to generally last longer. So this can be if we reinvest this money, right? They all in personal finance, they always talk about the value of compound interest, right? This is our opportunity to secure compound interest for our facility and infrastructure asset management plans. If we can figure out ways to bring these things together, save money, and use those savings to funnel back into our organization to address these issues as well. It's not even talking about energy savings and other things like that. This is just the savings that can come about, both money and resources, in integrating these two critical aspects of your capital and operations and maintenance, which again are generally the biggest parts of your asset management program. So thanks folks for that. I have one final thought. If you've seen the video, you've heard me saying the term deferred capital renewal and maintenance throughout the presentation instead of deferred maintenance. For those who have seen me at conferences or attended any of our webinars, we at Roth IAMS want to change the conversation around deferred maintenance. We think that deferred maintenance is mostly not maintenance. It's actually mostly deferred capital renewal that needs to get done. And I also believe that there are some within the non-facility world, but are stakeholders for large facilities that have sort of become deaf to the term deferred maintenance. It's a little bit of the, Chicken Little, the sky is falling. Oh yeah, we've heard all about deferred maintenance, whatever. We want to change the conversation. And so whether you use the term deferred capital renewal and maintenance as we sort of use as our typical vernacular, or you have a more preferred term or perhaps multiple terms like the state of Florida, which uses deferred capital repairs and replacements, and deferred capital maintenance and repairs, and deferred capital replacements and renewals. They broke the term down into two terms. We don't care what you say. We just hope that you'll stop saying deferred maintenance. So now we've got some time for questions and answers. Are there any questions in the chat, Alicia?
Not so far, but we'll give people a couple of minutes here to type them in.
Perfect. Grab a sip of water while we're waiting.
We've got one question in from Coco. Which program or software is the best to capture all of these details?
That's a great question. And I think if there was one piece of software that did everything well, everyone would be using it. And so in our experience, from an equipment inventory perspective, there's two sides to it. Actually, I'm not sure. Can we unmute? Yeah, just give us 1 second. Coco, we'll unmute your mic. Just a sec.
Yes.
I think you are now unmuted. Go ahead.
Yes. Hello, sir. So hello, everyone. Thanks for arranging this amazing presentation. And it is very, very great. And I really appreciated those information. So one of the concerns that I have, I am in this industry more than 10 years. And, I have my millwright license, have significant knowledge in the technical industry. So what is the best tools that while I'm calling the vendor, so the vendor is doing the repair, so is tracking those details, and that details is going to the annually basis, and that is going to the capital, and that is going to the budget perspective, and the manufacturer specification, how all of this is going to be on a streamline, and how you can have the best control on the facility equipment. I'm not sure if I give you the bigger picture here or the clear picture. I know it's a little bit complicated, but I want to hear which one is the best.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. And you're absolutely right. It is very complicated. And as I sort of said before, right, if there was a piece of facility asset management software that was the best at everything for everyone, I think there'd be one vendor and everybody would use it. And so I don't actually think that there's a best piece of software for everybody. I do believe that there's a best piece of software for every individual institution. And that really starts with understanding what your business objectives and current business processes are that you're using in terms of other software and planning and finance and all of those pieces, layering on top of that what data that you have or what data that you want or what data that you need in order to achieve those objectives and fulfill those and utilize those methodologies or those processes. And then at that point, based on that, you would have a unique list of requirements that you have for the software and list of data that you want to manage. And at that point, that will identify your best piece of software. So this ties directly into what we call the onion lovingly. And I'll send you some information, and maybe guys will also add the onion slide into this a little bit because a lot of folks want to put software first.
Yes.
And actually, I think that's I think software is the tail wagging the dog. I think you need to know, what are you trying to achieve? What data do you want to have? And at that point, that will allow you to find the best software for you and your unique organization, as opposed to, this is the best software product on the market.
Yeah,
and I'm sorry for the non-answer, honestly, but I don't believe that there's one software that is best in class for everybody, because everybody has different objectives, has different methodologies that they use, and has different data that they need in order to answer the key questions that they need to ask.
Yeah, honestly, so my biggest concern is a vendor came in, perform a PM, perform a correction, or perform a predictive, or whatever maintenance that they did. So that, based on that, and then the payment, and then that is going to go to the life cycle, that is going to go to the annual, that goes to the quarterly maintenance, annual. So all of that I did not see that software is capturing all of these based on, from the finance perspective, based on the performance of the equipment, based on the evaluation of the equipment. So all of these is transferring and connecting to each other in order to have 100% accurate, successful facility manager. And then from the senior perspective, once you have all of these details, and then they will see, we pay on the chiller $25,000, and then why we are paying this, why it is failing. So like all of that details are not being captured because of the software program.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you're talking about, I think, would typically get captured in a typical CMMS or computerized maintenance management system. But you're right, how that links up to the capital. I mean, I'll be honest. Every CMMS system has a capital planning module. Again, if there's any CMMS folks on here, they're probably going to get mad at me, but I actually don't think they do capital planning very well, because they try to treat it like maintenance. And so that's why if you look at the presentation, we talk a lot about your CMMS and your capital asset management system, because we do believe that those should be two different things. I mean, I'll be honest, and again, I'm not trying to sales pitch folks, but if work order systems did capital planning well, SLAM would not exist, which is the other, as I mentioned earlier, I'm the co-founder of SLAM Technologies. If work order systems did capital planning well, we wouldn't have felt the need to build a capital planning software, because if you've already got a work order software and it does capital planning well, why would you want to license another piece of software? So I will say that those are two very different things, and we think they're different softwares.
Thank you, sir.
Happy to touch base offline and dive a little bit deeper into your specific situation, Coco. But unfortunately, there's no simple answer. But okay. I will follow up afterwards, and we can maybe dive a little bit deeper.
Absolutely.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Do we have some other questions?
Yes, we do. So we've got a question from Mark here. So he wants to get back to the conversation around eating the elephant. And he's wondering if you have any suggestions on asset management implementation. So you can't eat the elephant quickly. Do you go for a building by building approach, or do you go for a campus location by location approach? How do you start to tackle that elephant?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you're on a campus type situation, so I'm going to answer this question in two different ways, because there's probably two different types of organizations on here. If you are a geographically distributed portfolio, so not a campus type, and Mark, I know that's not your question, but I'm going to answer the other alternative first, and then I'll come back to your situation on a campus. So if you're a geographically distributed portfolio, I would go building by building. Right? Rather than say, hey, we're only going to tag these 5 types of equipment now, whatever the case is, because the mobilization to those sites, the disturbance of those folks on the site is a much more significant cost. So if you've got a remote site and you've got to drive there 3 or 4 times because you're doing it equipment by equipment, it's going to cost you more in resources. Now, if you're doing it with in-house resources and they're already there, okay, that sort of goes, kind of takes that off the table. But if you're having to mobilize to lots of different sites over a large area, figure out what you want to gather, go gather everything in that building, and then come back. It will cost you less time. The mobilization will be a much less significant aspect of the cost, whether that's an internal cost or a third-party cost. If you're on a campus setting like you are, Mark, and like you mentioned before, I would use the criticality of the equipment, right? What are your highest risk pieces of equipment in terms of potential failure, and pick those first, pick a certain number. But you do want to find, eventually you got to find what we call the Goldilocks, the sweet spot, right? Not too much data, not enough data. But we always recommend you start a little bit smaller. Again, on a campus setting, I would say start a little bit smaller. If you think you want to gather information on 25 pieces of equipment, maybe only gather it on 15 to start, because you've got to be able to maintain that data. So again, geographically spread out portfolio. I would do building by building, gather all the data on all the pieces of equipment. In a campus setting, I would look at what are your most critical pieces of equipment to the operations and the programs you deliver, and start there. And then if that works and you can manage that data set, then go do the next number of pieces of equipment until you find, oh my gosh, I've either run out of equipment that I want to do PMs on, or I have too much data and I can't manage it. So let's stop now until we can manage that data set. So hopefully, Mark, that gives you an answer to that.
Yep.
Perfect. Awesome.
Wonderful.
Other questions?
We have another question from Risa, and she's asking for capital planning. What data at a minimum should we be collecting, i.e. equipment age, cost, condition rating, type of system? And would it be different data from your CMMS than it would be, would it be different data for your CMMS data needed for preventative maintenance or on-demand requests?
So I guess there's two issues, right? There's the elements. Typically in an FCA, you're gathering information on all of the elements, right, of within the building. So architectural, structural, mechanical, electrical, all those sorts of things. For preventative maintenance, you're typically not doing preventative maintenance on all the elements within the building. So again, you have a broader data set in an FCI, but it's shallower. For the equipment inventory for preventive maintenance, you have a less diverse data set, but it's deeper. And so for an FCA, ultimately the value of a facility condition assessment is tell me what to do, when to do it, excuse me, and how much is it going to cost. So at a minimum, pardon me, let me just get a quick drink. At a minimum, you need a cost to replace the element. Sorry. A cost to replace the element. You need what we call a remaining useful life, which determines the timing for when you should take the action. The type of action is typically, in a typical condition assessment, is an engineering study, which means I can't really accurately identify the issue visually. There's a major repair, which is doing either a repair to a part of the element or doing a replacement of a sub-element, like replacing a motor within a unit, and then a life cycle replacement. So you need to have a cost and a remaining useful life. Now, the remaining useful life is typically tied to two things, which is the age of the equipment as well as the condition rating. So I think the points that you brought up in the question, I believe, kind of cover off the typical things that you're gathering in an FCA. Now, there's lots of other things you can gather, but at a bare minimum, you need to know what to do, when to do it, and how much it's going to cost so you can develop that forecast of deferred capital renewal and maintenance backlog. Now, for preventative maintenance, you want to have that barcode on those individual pieces of equipment, and you're going to have more line items because, again, you might have 3 boilers merged up into one as opposed to individual pieces. So your data is going to be more granular. You're typically going to gather make, model. At a minimum, you're going to gather make, model, serial number, location, and that tag number. Now, you want to carry over that tag number. That tag number becomes the link between your capital and maintenance. But that's sort of the minimum piece. Now, depending on the type of equipment that you're inventorying, there may be other, what we call a desired data set beyond make, model, serial number, location, tag number that you want to collect, like belt size or motor size or fan type, or filter type, or other things like that. So it's similar data, more granular, and you'll typically gather more detailed information. Now, there are times in condition assessments where we gather make, model, serial number. That would be more of an enhanced condition assessment than a typical condition assessment, where I think your question was at a minimum. So that was a long answer, but hopefully I touched on the points that you were looking for, and I apologize for the raspy throat there. Hopefully we can edit that out.
Wonderful. So I don't see any other questions in the chat at this time. If you have more questions, feel free to pop them in, but otherwise maybe what I'll do is I'll have Gurpreet pop up the survey so people can start to fill that out before we sort of wrap things up here. If you wouldn't mind just filling out the survey, it just helps us to get some feedback on our webinars and make sure that we continue to bring you content that's of value to you. There's a QR code up on the screen. We'll also include it in our follow-up, but that takes you to our thought leadership page. So you'll find Bill's blog posts on there, copies of this webinar along with past webinars, and a lot of great knowledge on there that you can share with your team in terms of facility asset management.
And thanks as you're filling out the responses, folks. Thanks again for your time today. And this will be the last. We're going to go on a little bit of a summer hiatus. So this is our last webinar until September. So we'll be back after the summer break and back on a every 2-week cycle. So hopefully you've enjoyed our first half of the year webinar program if you've attended more than one. And have a great summer. And we look forward to hopefully seeing everyone back in the fall.
Wonderful. And I'll just do one last check for questions. And I think we're good.
Awesome. Bye, everybody.